So, morning, everybody. And Alastair MW began his career as a flying winemaker, making wine in France, Italy, Spain, Chile, Argentina, and South Africa. He gained his Master of Wine qualification in 2000, and at the time was only one of three New Zealand winemakers to pass the exam. In 2002, he returned to New Zealand and joined Villa Maria Estate as group winemaker. And then general manager overseeing the winemaking and viticultural program for the entire portfolio. In 2015, he joined Foley Wines as group chief winemaker and head viticulture for the company brands that included Te Karianga, Martinborough Vineyard, Grove Mill, Vavasour, and Mount Difficulty. I hope I pronounced those correctly. In July 2000, thank you. In July 2021, following 26 years of experience in the wine industry, Maling established his own consulting business, Maling Wines, which includes winemaking consultancy and the advisory to Oritane, a company specializing in traceability, authenticity, and provenance. So thank you very much, Alastair, for joining us today, and over to you.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And thank you very much for asking me to come on and talk a little bit about Oritane. We're in mid-vintage here, and things are tracking along as they do in vintage. You have a good day and a bad day, but on the whole, things are looking pretty good. We had some difficult weather early in March with some flooding in Hawke's Bay, but from that point on, it's generally looked pretty good. So I think overall, region by region, there'll be some ups and downs, but I think probably the further south you go this year, probably the stronger the vintage. But anyway, look, in terms of Oritane and in terms of my position, and thanks, Michelle, for that introduction. Back in March 2022, Oritane were looking for an into the wine industry, and they came and asked if I would help them advise and set up and introduce the wine category. They've got a lot of experience from a technical point of view, scientific point of view, marketing and business point of view, but not in the wine industry. And so I was able to come in and have come in to help make sure that technically we're asking the right questions. Technically, we are getting the samples, grape samples, wine samples at the appropriate time, and then obviously introducing them to opportunities around the world. So it's been an exciting 12 months with them, and I'm going to show you some of the background and some of the results, particularly focusing on Pyramid Valley. Pyramid Valley is a North Canterbury winery. I'm sure you've all heard of Pyramid Valley. Steve Smith and Brian Sheath purchased Pyramid Valley perhaps 3 years ago now, and they've been looking to recreate that brand, certainly take it to a higher price point, and they wanted to tell the story around that particular site. So we'll showcase the sampling and the results from that particular vineyard. We had a launch for Pyramid Valley in the UK in October last year, and you may well have read some information about it, seen some print material around Pyramid Valley and Oritane, and we'll show a bit more of that. So I think just from a very beginning, I'm just going to pull up a PowerPoint. It's not death by PowerPoint tonight or today, sorry, but what it is there is some quite technical pieces in here, and I think in terms of helping understand the concept of Oritane and what it does, some PowerPoint points will help. But I'm also will play a short video that it only goes for 2 minutes, but it just also, I think, in a more succinct way, really summarizes what Oritane does. Oritane is not just focused about wine, very heavily involved in cotton, cocoa, wool, meat, pretty much, you can sort of name any product that grows or is a living animal, they are working with. So let me bring up that initial presentation, and we'll go from there. Can you, I haven't shared that, have I? So I need to just share. Excuse my skill set is pretty poor. Okay, here it is. Do you have that on your screen?
We have the
Yes,
we have the
do.
PowerPoint.
Yep, brilliant, brilliant. Okay, cool. So look, Oratane started back in 2008, and it's all about forensic science and their ability to verify the origin of product. It was started by a professor out of the Otago University, Professor Russell Frew, and he was playing around with the idea of how could he help New Zealand agricultural export products verify and prove the product that was heading overseas. As you know, New Zealand at the bottom of the world, and we have to ship globally, and there's always the risk of a product being altered and changed and modified at any point in that in the program. So he started playing around with the idea of utilizing isotopes and trace elements from an individual product that comes out of the soil, the atmosphere, the water, and I'll show you a slide on that later. And he felt that he was making some progress with it, and the New Zealand MPI, Ministry of Primary Industries, had a situation where they had caught a foreign fishing trawler off the coast of New Zealand, and they claimed that the fishing trawler was fishing off the east coast of New Zealand, and they claimed that they were fishing off the west coast, east coast being illegal, west coast being east coast being illegal, west coast being legal. And so they came to Professor Russell Frew and said, look, we've got this trawler, we suspect that they've caught the fish on the wrong side of New Zealand, can you help us? And so he said, look, I think I can. And he went out and he took samples of the seabed on the east coast and samples from the west coast of New Zealand, and then he took a sample of the fish, and what the fish had been eating off the seabed came through in the forensic analysis, and he was able to prove through multiple data collection on both the east coast and the west coast that yes, the fish had been caught on the east coast of New Zealand. That resulted in a $3 million fine to the fishing trawler. And so from that point, he realized that testing isotopes, testing trace elements, the natural elements of a product actually had value and had merit. So from that point on, Oratane started. And I think Andrea might have asked me yesterday, what does Oratane actually mean? And I've found that out now because I couldn't answer the question. But very early on, it's a combination of words using origin and certain. And I think the initial catchphrase was certainty of origin, and the name Oratane came out of that, origin and certain. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to escape out of this PowerPoint. I'm just going to bring up the video because I think that's really worthwhile to show you at this point. Do you have that on your screen now?
Yes. No sound, Alastair.
Sorry about that. I think we had that problem yesterday, didn't we?
Mhm.
Let me go here. Okay.
From our pioneering origins in New Zealand, Oratane has become a global leader in applying forensic science and data to verify the origin of products and raw materials. Today, we partner with some of the world's leading brands to support their ESG commitments, reduce the risk of fraud and unethical practices, and help protect their reputations. Our vision is to be the world's most trusted company at forensically verifying the origin of products and raw materials. Today, we provide proof of origin for leading brands across a wide range of sectors, from industry associations to iconic consumer brands. No matter whether we're verifying food or fibre, cotton or coffee, wine or wool, our science gets to the truth of the matter. Oratane, proving origin, protecting reputations.
So I think that very short and sharp video, but I think it really does help explain where they are and where they're going. And just to reiterate that, it's all around forensically verified technology. It's all about trying to reduce risk. They want to protect brands. They're looking at ESG claims, and really at the end of the day, what they are looking to do is work with individual customers, individual clients, and help them verify and prove where that origin comes from. So it's very interesting, as I mentioned, around the cotton world, where they're doing a huge amount of work in particularly in China, and in America is very protective of the type of cotton coming in, and Oratane is working really strongly with them. So in terms of the science, this is probably the very interesting part, and we'll get on to wine as well. But a plant and an animal, where it is grown, where it lives, has a unique location, and be that from the soil, be that from the water, be that from the atmosphere, and everything that it eats and drinks and from that location has its own unique element, which then creates this origin fingerprint. And so as you test a product, you're able to test its source, and then from that point of view, you're able to determine a fingerprint from it. And so what they've discovered is that even from within to 100 meters from each other, they can actually identify and differentiate a product from another through its location. And so just giving an idea of in New Zealand, and this dates back to the data that we collected last year, and it showcases that each of those dots represents a fingerprint of a sample taken in New Zealand. So last year we went out and we went to sample around 700 different vineyards and blocks within New Zealand, and it was all about how do we showcase what Oratane's capabilities are. So the red being Marlborough, which is where we got the majority of sampling from, Canterbury, Marlborough and Waipara. And while that's spinning on a 3D point of view, and if that was to stop, the definitions would be certainly wider, but it was sort of heartening for the technical team, given that they were unsure about whether wine and grapes they would be able to provide a fingerprint, and they're pretty excited by the early differentiation that they could do. So the broadness of some of those data lines would suggest two things. One, it's either a wider region, or just because the sample set is very small and therefore it hasn't built up a sufficient database to actually create a stronger pattern. And the next slide that I'll show you is one where they've used, and I'll just flick to that now. We can come back to this one. But this is an example of where, and this is not, this is more to do with cotton than it is than wine, but it just showcases the example of a very heavy database set and just how strong the modeling could look in that particular area. So just going back to the New Zealand one, what we saw here is that there's definitely a point of difference between the regions, and as we delve further into more and more sampling and building up that database, the core of the data set will get stronger and provide further and stronger proof of origin. We haven't put on there, for example, Auckland or Gisborne or Hawke's Bay, because the sample sets from those regions were only a handful of grapes. So, for example, we've got some grapes off Kumeu River in Auckland, which was brilliant, but because that was only off three vineyards and 3 blocks, that the sample set was too small, and the representation just wasn't high enough to showcase here. So, you know, really, when we are going through a vineyard and looking for samples, you know, we're looking at 20 to 25 samples per block, which then allows them to quantify and verify that the samples, so they're testing in triplicate to make sure that their forensic science is correct. So really how it works is that Oratane will work with a producer, and be that through someone that comes to them and says, look, we have a problem in the market. And if we're talking wine, you know, there's really probably 3 levels. It could be at the very high end where, you know, we know that fraud does occur. Counterfeit wines do occur in the marketplace, and certainly some of the high end wines, very high premium wines, they spend a lot of money and a lot of time looking to protect their brand. And, you know, they use innumerable number of measures, be it under the capsule, label, etching on the bottle. You know, there's a lot of practice that is going on, but no one at the moment is actually able to quantify that the wine in the bottle actually is that product. And this is where Oratane feel that they've got an opportunity to support the industry at the very high end, because it sort of works in an alignment with all the other methods and ways of trying to protect that brand. And so by taking a sample and because you are going to get slight vintage variation because of atmospheric conditions, climatic conditions, every year you would take a fresh sample, and that would then become the fingerprint of that wine for that particular vintage. So if you said hypothetically in 20 years' time, I don't know, a First Growth, for example, had a problem and wanted to check on their wine, provided that we had samples from the cellar that were authentic and original, they could then fingerprint it, plot it against the authentic, against the wine of concern, and they could tell you whether the fingerprint mapped or overlaid on the original, and they could tell you whether that was a problem wine or not. Lots of questions will come out of this, and really you only need about 5 mils to 10 mils at most, 5 mils to test the sample. But the second area, I guess that, and a lot of wineries and brand owners around the world probably look at themselves in the view that they are looking to tell their own individual story. They're looking to tell that story, and it's very much like a Pyramid Valley. Their bit of land, their wine profile, their taste profile, they're looking to differentiate themselves and have a point of difference against other brands, other wineries, in order to tell that story to the consumer. And this is the second area that Pyramid Valley saw of benefit, where they saw the benefit of the verification, proof of origin from Orotain. So the science supported the knowledge that they could taste the difference in their different vineyard blocks. And so that, I think, is there's thousands of wineries globally that look to try and position themselves differently. The third area is probably an area that is further of interest and opportunity is with the movement of wine around the world in bulk and being bottled in market. There offers the opportunity for adulteration along the way, and at any point in the supply chain, Orotain can take a sample, test it against the database, and satisfy both the retailer and the brand owner that the wine is as it should be. And we've certainly had some conversations with retailers who see an opportunity, and certainly some distributors as well. There's an opportunity here in terms of creating a point of difference to their product, to the retailer. And an example could be, what's an example? An example could be, for example, the Southeast Australia, where you have, a huge wine growing area. Retailers are looking, probably on the shelf there might be 7 to maybe 8 or 9 Southeast Australian Shiraz wines, perhaps. And what is the point of difference apart from price? It's perhaps it's the story and the brand, but also the idea that the knowledge to the retailer that they can prove that the product actually has come from that particular region is of interest. So there's multiple ways throughout the cycle that Orotain can benefit and be utilized where it's going. The other thing is that if brand owners do start to use Orotain, and some of them are happy to put the Orotain verification, and if you look at the bottom of the screen, there's the tick with the Orotain fingerprint on there. Some people are very interested in having that fingerprint as a little QR code on their packaging, and that would take them direct to an Orotain combined brand page. Others are very interested in using Orotain but not publicizing it. So just saying, look, they would engage Orotain to look at their product, run audits for them in the market, just to check that the products going into various markets are as they wanted. So they're sort of wanting to, I guess, sort of fly under the radar a little bit. Other brands are happy to tell a story which might just sort of put potential counterfeiters off choosing that brand. So again, just very quickly from a wine perspective, anywhere from the vineyard right through to the consumer, the authenticity can be verified and they can match at any point in the supply chain. Last year, they were trying to understand the qualitative impact of the trust mark, which is just what I mentioned, and there's a picture of it, and Country Road is a very good example. Country Road have used it from a cotton perspective on their labeling, and they ran a promotion talking about the verification of truth, the proof of origin, and the brand protection, and they ran a program on their clothing and versus disclosure, I guess, around Orotain and its verification program, and the consumer was prepared to pay a premium with the knowledge that the product itself was coming from a verified, proven origin. So they ran some qualitative research last year just to see where that would go, and they had coffee, they had a Ralph Lauren product, and they had they put Oyster Bay into the program, and out of it was generally the consumers trust the wine labels. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad generally they felt that what they picked up off the shelf was a Chianti, or was Bordeaux, or was New Zealand, or was Australian. So they had a lot more faith in the wine industry than they did in the coffee industry. So which was quite an interesting sort of feedback. But regardless of that, they all said that they would be pretty interested in, or they would accept a premium for that product, knowing that it was verified, and certainly from a lot of young consumers who use a lot of phone apps and commercial information, and they love following where that wine has come from and how it was made, and in this case the authentication of it. So they were excited by clicking on the QR code that took them through to information about Oratane, information about its reputation, and then also through to the winery. And that, I guess, is just sort of an example of Oratane's. It's not just the scientific, but it's also just supporting the customer and the brand owner around their product. So an interesting outcome from that research. So Pyramid Valley, they are the first winery to sign up and use Oratane. We have 2 other wineries in New Zealand that are wanting, and we're working our way through the use of Oratane. But also we've been talking to some of the appellational groups in New Zealand as well. They are very interested at it. There's sort of a growing development of geographic indicators in New Zealand. And so being able to authenticate that, and primarily at Central Otago and Marlborough, you've got Appellation Marlborough, which is a very strong body. They're looking at 100% Marlborough wines from Marlborough, and Central Otago is very strongly developing their geographic indicators. I think Bannockburn is the first GI from Central Otago, and I think Bendigo is looking to be the second. But certainly Pyramid Valley was wanted to showcase that and verify the provenance of their product, that it came 100% from that particular location. And so Oratane and Pyramid Valley worked really closely together in terms of sampling, developing a comparison, and it was a little bit of an unknown because, and I think it might be on the next slide here, I'll come back to this one here. So this here is just a picture of Pyramid Valley, and it's a very small estate. The vineyard from the bottom of your picture through to the right hand side to the top of the picture is only about 500 meters. There's 2 Pinot vineyards, two Chardonnay vineyards in there, and I understand from the Pyramid Valley team that they felt, and I've tried the wines, they're very distinctive, yet there's just a very short distance between each of the vineyard plots, and they wanted, I guess, the science to prove that what they were tasting was actually the case. And so from the 2020 vintage, the botanical collection out of Pyramid Valley can all be scientifically verified back to that unique vineyard sites. And I know that they're very excited about it, and are certainly using it from a marketing and a branding story perspective. So looking at the science at work, what we're going to do here is just, we're going to look at, firstly, looking back at it, and we're going to work our way down from regional to sub-regional down to the individual, and again just showcasing that individual database collection from New Zealand. And again, just to quickly outline there, Marlborough is in the red, you've got Hawke's Bay this time in green. This is from sampling from the past, Canterbury, and then Otago. And then we move into the Pyramid Valley vineyard itself as a whole, which is the I guess sort of the turquoise blue color. And then it's got, it's labeled Vineyard 1, Vineyard 2, Vineyard 3, but actually it's not an individual vineyard. It's actually some sampling from Marlborough and sampling from Bannockburn and sampling from the Awatere Valley. So it's not in it. So hence, for example, the Marlborough one looks like a very spread out data sample set. And largely that's because it's just a really small sample set, so it's rather broad, whereas if there were, you know, another 20 or 30 samples in there, it would be much more concentrated and give you that feeling. But what you can see there straight away is that the Pyramid Valley vineyard is pretty concentrated. Then you've got Marlborough spread out because it's a regional example. Bannockburn, the red, smaller sub-region, again, small sample set, but again, quite distinctively different. And then you've got the Awatere Valley in the purple, which is sitting to the left on just above Marlborough. So what you would see in some of those in the green sampling is those samples sitting up there more than likely have come from the Awatere Valley in the Marlborough data set. And then we go right down into the Pyramid Valley vineyard itself. And so these are the 4 individual sites. You've got Angel Flower and Earth Smoke, which is the, God, my eyesight's going, but I think it's the blue and the green is the 2 Pinot Noir vineyards. And then you've got the purple and red are the 2 Chardonnay vineyards. And so they are closer together in terms of plotting, but in each case, sample sets and they took I think 20 to 30 grape samples and plus 10 to 20 wine samples of those individual the grapes and the wine from those individual blocks, and has subsequently plotted them. And so what you can see right from the beginning, you've got a stronger data set, and there's a unique, and there's definitely a difference in regionality. Then you go to sub-regionality, which is your middle one against the Pyramid Valley. Again, distinctive points of difference, and then delving further down into a very narrow, what would be probably a 500-meter distance from across the face of the Pyramid Valley. Again, you've got some very clear scientific forensic data showcasing that there is a difference in the vineyards. And when Steve and the vineyard saw these scientific results, excited about the ability to tell that story. So, yeah, Pyramid Valley was certainly a world first. They put the QR code on the label. They wanted to tell the story about the scientific forensic science. As I mentioned, there's a number of brands out there that perhaps don't want to publicize it, but they really wanted to go out there and talk about the origin, talk about the clarity of science aligned with how they could taste, and that's how that one's worked. So just to really just sort of summarize, I guess, Oratane looked to verify authenticity and improve traceability and transparency. So it's not about, so they're able to come in and help solve a problem or help prove a product is from where it's from. You do need to have a database, because without a database, they don't have anything to be able to test against and compare and overlay. And when they are, when we do have sufficient database and they are testing a product, they would run an audit on it, and the audit would be a case of removing that brand data set from the let's say it's from a Marlborough region. They would remove that data from it, and then they would replot that brand's data set back into the map. And if the data set was plotted within Marlborough, then they could verify and prove that the product actually came from Marlborough. Should that brand who said it was from Marlborough, the product actually through an audit fall outside the regional data set, then they would be able to say with some certainty that the product hadn't come from Marlborough. They're working now on getting close to the 85% ruling certainly in New Zealand. We have an 85% ruling. I know America's a little bit different, but they're getting close to that. They're not 100% there yet, but they're working on being able to determine whether the wine there is 85% of a product, a legal limit in a product or not. And so that is still R&D, still work in progress, but they're reasonably confident that they can come to that point at some stage. So I think that's really a summary and a broad overview, and I guess a bit of coverage about what Oratane does and with Pyramid Valley. And I guess, as always, there's probably plenty of questions to go.
Yes, thank you very much, Alastair. Yes, there's two people here that have started off the questions, and can I ask Chris Fawkes to unmute himself? Chris has put through a couple of questions. His first, I think you may have already answered, but are you there, Chris? Are you able to?
Yes, hello everybody. Hi. Thanks for that very interesting presentation. Looking at it from sort of the narrow focus of somewhere like Bordeaux or Burgundy, or possibly things a little bit different. You're talking about the wine samples, the grape samples from Pyramid Valley. Now, were these grapes, or were they wines made from those grapes?
Both.
Both.
It was grape, and then wine, post fermentation, and then the bottled, just pre-bottling as well. So 3 different points in the process.
Gotcha. And that's interesting. So I think that brings back to my first question. I was wondering whether the actual impact of making the wine in the winery and all the processes that it goes through actually also brings traces which can be identified, or maybe will complicate the science. Is that the case?
Yeah, look, that's a very interesting question. That was one that we've posed ourselves. Not all wine is straight off the vineyard and with no additions. And so in particular, bentonite is a very good example of that one. It's a trace element and a product from the soils. And so there was concern that there would be a shift, and and again, this is a very interesting but exciting area for the scientific team in Oratane, because there is a very little shift in the fingerprint from the grape and the early wine juice process right through to the finished wine process. And so they are very confident that that the winemaking practices that take place will have very limited and very small impact on the final product. But what is just to further add to that, and you might have a question further, is that ultimately it's the final product in the bottle that is the most important fingerprint to have, because at the end of the day, that is the one more than likely that will be compared against and tested against and audited against to check for its authenticity.
Thank you. I'm thinking, again, just a final point in the Burgundy context, you can have a cellar where possibly grapes from Grand Cru vineyard, Premier Cru vineyard, and ordinary village vineyards are all processed in the same place,
yes,
by the same people, from sites which maybe are 100 meters apart, and the differentiation in quality and price is enormous. I mean, does this system, the Oratane system, hold out the possibility we'll know exactly what is in the bottle of Burgundy, which is something that people have been trying to discover for about 1,000 years?
Yes, I think that the hard part on that one is that you're relying. Can I say this? You're relying on the authenticity of the product that you're given to test against.
Yeah, that is a very important point.
And so I think, as I mentioned, Oratane can only test what they're given. And if, for example, using that example, they said, okay, there is here is a fruit from Burgundy. Yes, I'm sure they can provide that. Can they take that down to an individual domain and down to 3 or 4 rows? It would depend on the clarity of the sampling, or the finesse of the sampling. If it was to be across, I don't know, let's say 2 domains, hypothetically, or two vineyards, and they put them together, then the fingerprint would represent that blend.
Understood. Thank you.
So it's Burgundy is a difficult one. Bordeaux is a bit easier, just generally because they don't get down to rows or very small areas. It's a larger area, which therefore makes it a more easier process of sampling. So Burgundy, I don't know how easy that would be in the context that from what I'm understanding, but as the answer really is it comes back to the quality of the product that they're given to put a fingerprint against.
Thank you, Chris. And I think Wink Lorch has got a couple of questions, probably moving on from Chris's questions as well. Go ahead, Wink.
Hi, Alastair. So my first question does lead on completely from what you just said. I mean, you don't have to name names, but have any wine producers in fine wine areas or whatever yet used Oratane for verify samples for fraud reasons, or tested your system out?
We're in no one has yet used it, but we are in conversations with 2 or 3 who are very interested in the technology and what that might do, how that might work. There's, like anything from the wine industry, it's new, relatively new anyway, even though Oratane have proven their technology in many other agricultural areas. And certainly, having spoken to a couple of very high-end wineries in Europe, they are very aware of a problem. They know they have problems, but they don't want to be the first producer to try it. So they're sort of waiting. So hence the reason why Oratane believes that it's a good means to get some runs on the board, so to speak, from New Zealand producers or regions, and start to build opportunities and showcase its credentials in the wine category. And what I've found already is that if producers are prepared to give it a go, Oratane is certainly willing to work with wineries to showcase the capabilities, to compare samples, and because generally there's more interest in looking at their own product and seeing what the fingerprint looks like compared to showing a set of data from, I don't know, California or New Zealand or Australia if you're in Europe. So really in the early days, it's a case of getting a few proactive leaders, and I think that's one thing that certainly Oratane have found, is that the early adopters are the most progressive, and they're the ones that often are ahead of the game when it comes to be it protection of their wine, brand storytelling, marketing story, or protecting from an ESG perspective, or whatever angle it may be. But certainly the early adopter would be would certainly get the benefits of early support from Oratane's technology.
Okay, thank you. My other question is not related really, but when you mentioned that really all this work was only as good as the database you had in order to match things, it reminded me of grape variety databases for DNA testing. And I wondered whether your system can identify whether a wine is made from the specific grape variety mentioned. So, for example, if you think about sort of years old Carmenere Merlot mixed up in Chile, you know, if somebody said this is 100% Merlot, would your system be able to verify that?
They're looking again. That's an R&D project. That probably comes a bit more down into the DNA of a grape variety, and this forensic science is not DNA. It's more about testing the trace element and the isotope, the natural elements in a product. So it's not DNA testing in itself. That's a different process. So when we've done some sampling, it certainly threw up some alignment with Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Noir, but they haven't got sufficient data yet to say something with a bit of certainty that that it's possible to test that. So I think, to be honest, Wink, I think it's a long-term opportunity or project if it would be available.
So if I get it clear, your system is much more about place, rather the origin,
Yes,
rather
correct.
than the actual grape. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Wink. I think there's a few more questions lining up, Alastair. So Christine Austin's got a quick question for you. Go ahead, Christine. Oh, no. Okay. Christine's question was about how much is the cost of setting up a database? And is this just for the big companies, or will small producers be able to use the system?
No, there is a variation in cost. What it comes down to is the level of support an individual brand wants. And from a wine point of view, we're talking cents per bottle, not dollars per bottle. So it's relatively small, but there is obviously a cost in terms of sample gathering, data collection, the scientific team forensically testing, auditing in the marketplace. But ultimately, the conversation will vary depending on the supplier or the customer in terms of what level of support they want from Oratane. So, for example, if it involves a concern in the market for fraud, and it involves a lot of testing, a lot of sampling in the marketplace, checking that against authenticated product, auditing in the marketplace, there's obviously a greater cost that comes into that concept. But the general data collection, creating a fingerprint, supporting a brand in terms of its storytelling, the costs are relatively low. And as I said, they're probably in the cents per bottle, not higher.
Okay, thank you. That's hope that's answered your question, Christine. Over to Richard Bamfield.
Thanks, Andrea. Alastair, nice to see you. Thanks for staying up for us. Alastair, just firstly, in terms of, is it too simplistic to say that the origin fingerprint of a vineyard is much clearer if no chemicals are used or have been used in that vineyard?
I don't think there is too much of a problem, but what they have are starting to work on is being able to determine organic versus non-organic vineyard, and that in itself is a growing area of interest, particularly, or not just in the wine industry, but in any industry really. And they've been doing a lot with tomatoes, and they've been able to create very clear fingerprint of organic grown tomatoes versus non-organic. And so that, to answer your question, I guess yes, there is a difference, and they're able to fingerprint and put a fingerprint and a point of difference to that.
That's really interesting, because as you may have seen, the EU has recently announced that they're likely to introduce regulations to prevent greenwashing. And
yes.
So that sort of technology could be very handy, I think. Another question is that it strikes me that the origin fingerprint of a vineyard probably changes with time. I'm just be interested how fast Oratane thinks that change could be.
Yeah, again, that is again that's a good question which we've been mulling over ourselves, and what they are in the process of doing. We've gone to a New Zealand producer, and we've gone and got 10 years of prior vintages from the same vineyard to see if there is, and they're still in the process of testing and determining if there is and how much that shift and change occurs. We believe that there would be a small change each year, just purely because climatically that time of the year is different from the wine. But there's, particularly from a red wine point of view anyway, you are getting a change in structure of a wine, evolution of anthocyanins and tannin evolution. So we believe that there will be some shift, but again, what it comes back down to is provided, and they keep a database as well of the product. So let's say hypothetically it's a 20-year-old wine that is in question. Provided we are testing that same wine from that vintage, the fingerprint should be the same. You would have seen evolution. Evolution may vary, but there will be a stronger compatibility taking place. Yeah. But I can't give you a categorical answer on that one. Sorry, Richard, just at the moment because it's still in an R&D program.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And Michael, for John, he's probably moving along a little bit more from Chris's question earlier.
Yeah, it is. Firstly, Alastair, thank you very much. That was fascinating. So my question is, and you may have part answered this, have you actually done testing in a place where, for example, you have 2 vintages of DRC Echezeaux, and for the purposes of discussion, let's assume that they are 100% authentic, and then in a lineup with other Vin Romanée or Côte de Nuit wines, including others purportedly to be Echezeaux, would you in a double-blind test be able to say that the 2 vintages of DRC Echezeaux are identical or at least closer than all the others? Has such a test been done?
No. However, I believe that they would have confidence that they could show the difference. And again, what we are doing is through with Pyramid Valley is starting to gather some prior vintages, mapping those against each other, against neighboring vineyards, and the same applies in Central Otago. So so in time, I believe we'll have a stronger answer to your question there, Michael. But at this particular time, no, certainly not from a Burgundy point of view. We have Oratane have not tested any Burgundy wines at this point.
Thank you. Have you tested outside of New Zealand at all?
Yes, we have Spain, California, Washington, Oregon.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Are there any other questions there? That we've got a couple more minutes if anybody else has a question for Alastair. Is there any sort of, not copyright, but a sort of on the Oratane process? Is there something that's specific that you're doing that other people cannot do?
I think it's the actual testing is using NMRI. So, but what it comes down to the way that they data, from what I understand, is the unique aspect to any industry or anybody could use a spectrometer and perhaps come up with some of the fingerprinting of that location, but it's actually the interpretation of the data and how you go about that interpretation that apparently Oratane sets them apart from how other people may well test and interpret data. Also, from what I understand, they need far fewer samples than other methods used in the marketplace to talk and showcase origin, proof of origin.
You might have to clear your diary. You might become very busy in the future. Oh, well, thank you very much. Anyway, Alastair, I'll hand over to Michelle.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Alastair. It was a fascinating presentation on the proof of origin and how wine producers can apply this to their brands, also in terms of traceability and authenticity. Really interesting talk, and I'm sure very much appreciated by all of us here. Thank you so much again.
Good. Well, look, thank you. And you know, as you will have gathered, it's not a complete answer. There's a lot still in development, but if anyone wants further information, would like to have a further conversation, would, you know, like to suggest someone to get some sampling done and a database built, then, you know, I'd be more than welcome having a conversation, having an email with anyone that wanted to understand it a little bit further. And if I can't answer it, then I can certainly put you on to a team within Oratane who are very capable of answering any question at all. But thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Alastair. And everybody's saying thank you very much on the line as well on the chat.